Life in Canada is becoming impossible, or at least that is how it feels to many people living through the storms of this moment. Students are being rejected at record rates, families are priced out of their homes, and immigration, once Canada's greatest pride and the symbol of its openness to the world, is now its deepest conflict. The story begins with the numbers, cold and merciless. Over 60% of study visa applications were rejected this year, the highest rate in more than a decade. For Indian students who once formed the largest share of international arrivals in Canada, the blow has been devastating. Nearly 8 in 10 applications were denied, leaving families who had saved, borrowed, and sacrificed staring at rejection stamps that extinguished years of hope. Last year, India accounted for 41% of all international students in Canada, a figure so high it transformed campuses and communities alike. But today, the doors that once welcomed them appear to be slamming shut. The reasons, Ottawa insists, are about survival. Too many people, not enough homes, not enough classrooms, not enough infrastructure to absorb the tidal wave of arrivals. Housing markets in Toronto and Vancouver have buckled under the pressure, rents climbing so steeply that even working families find themselves squeezed into basements, students sharing mattresses in overcrowded apartments, and young Canadians wondering whether homeownership will ever be anything more than a dream. Policymakers argue that drastic measures were unavoidable. In December, the government doubled the financial proof requirement for students to more than $21,000. A barrier designed to ensure that only those who could truly afford to study would come. Graduates now face stricter language tests in English or French and fewer pathways to permanent residency. Colleges offering unapproved programs have been stripped of their eligibility to provide work permits, ending what many saw as exploitative visa mill operations. The once celebrated Student Direct Stream, which had promised fast-track processing for applicants from 14 countries, has been scrapped altogether. And for the first time in years, Canada has capped the number of study permits to 437,000, nearly 10% fewer than the year before. What was once a proud symbol of Canadian openness has become the flashpoint of its hardest debates. In Toronto and Vancouver, you can feel it in the air. The sun dips behind glass towers, and the streets echo with the tension of two visions of Canada's future. On one side, marchers demand that immigration be slowed, that culture and identity be protected from being overwhelmed. "I'm not saying no to immigrants," one organizer explains to a camera, his flag raised high. "I'm saying we need to slow it down. We need to protect our culture, our identity, our history." On the other side, counter-protesters roar back, voices sharp with anger. "Not in our park, not in our community." For them, the Canada First rally is not a plea for balance, but a mask for exclusion, division, and the dangerous revival of ideas thought buried since the 1930s. Christie Pitts Park, where they clash, is not an accidental choice. It is the site of a 1933 riot rooted in anti-Jewish hatred, and for the counter-protesters, it is sacred ground, a place where history must not be allowed to repeat itself. Toronto police form a living wall between the groups, but walls bend and walls break. Soon fists fly, signs splinter, and the evening descends into confrontation. Riot officers and tactical squads close Bloor Street, shutting down one of the city's main arteries. By nightfall, at least 10 people are in handcuffs, while social media floods with shaky videos replayed millions of times, each clip fueling anger, each share magnifying division. Once the genie of rage is out of the bottle, can it ever be forced back in? And what do these scenes say about a country that once prided itself on being the most multicultural in the world? The truth is that protests are only the most visible signs of a much deeper conflict. Immigration is not an afterthought in Canada. It is the story itself, woven into the fabric of its cities, its economy, its promise. Yet today, that fabric feels stretched to breaking. With more than 850,000 international students already here, nearly double the numbers of a decade ago, the system groans under the weight. These students bring energy, diversity, and billions in tuition fees that keep universities alive. They work in restaurants, hospitals, and factories that would struggle without them. They often dream of becoming permanent residents, future nation builders. But they also bring pressure, crowding housing, markets already in crisis, filling classrooms beyond capacity, and testing the patience of local communities. Families squeezed by soaring rents ask why newcomers are prioritized when they themselves can no longer afford to live in the cities they grew up in. Supporters of stricter controls argue that without limits, the country risks collapse. They insist the housing market cannot bear the strain, that wages will stagnate, that resentment will grow until multicultural harmony shatters. Critics, however, see scapegoating at work. They argue it was not students who caused the housing crisis, but decades of underbuilding, poor policy, and government inaction. They point out that international students, far from being drains, contribute massively to the economy and cultural vibrancy of Canadian cities. Yet, in the current climate, nuance is drowned out by noise. Somewhere in the middle lies a public increasingly torn between empathy and exhaustion, compassion and fear. And so the Toronto protests, raw and chaotic, are more than noise. They are a reflection of a nation wrestling with the profound question of whether it can continue to be the world's champion of multiculturalism while its own foundations are shaking. The tension on Canada's streets is only one layer of a much deeper story that stretches across the oceans, from the deserts of the Middle East to the crowded cities of India, from refugee camps in Africa to families in Latin America making impossible choices. Canada is not the first choice for most of these migrants, not even the second. Ask an Indian engineer where they would rather go, and many will answer without hesitation: the United States. For decades, the American dream has held unmatched power, promising Silicon Valley jobs, world-class universities, and the chance to climb from obscurity to unimaginable success. Ask a Syrian family displaced by war, and they may dream of Germany, where millions of refugees were welcomed during the height of the crisis, and where social supports are strong. Ask a Brazilian or Nigerian student, and some will name the UK, where historical ties, language familiarity, and prestigious institutions draw them. Australia too calls to many, especially those who value safety, sun, and opportunity, even if the remoteness of Oceania makes it feel far from everything. And yet, despite these preferences, the lines outside Canadian embassies grow longer every year. Why? Because in each of those first choices, the doors are slamming shut. In the United States, the coveted H-1B visa, the golden ticket for skilled workers, is capped at $85,000 per year for a nation of 300 million. For Indian nationals, the backlog to transition from temporary work visas to permanent residency stretches into centuries. Generations could come and go before an application sees daylight. Politicians promise to make things even harder, vowing mass deportations and further restrictions. The UK, once a gateway to opportunity, now slams applicants with government fees exceeding £3,000, waits of 8 to 12 months, and rules so strict that even highly skilled workers cannot bring spouses or children. Family reunification, so central to immigrant dreams, is denied by paperwork and policy. Australia's system, long admired, is now snarled by queues of 3 to 4 years for skilled workers. The points threshold for eligibility keeps rising, pricing out many who would have qualified just a decade ago. OECD data lays the contrast bare. Canada processes 73% of skilled worker applications within 12 months. The United States processes 12%, Australia 31%, the UK 45%. In the global marketplace of dreams, Canada does not merely look generous. It looks like the only functioning system left. But this accessibility is a double-edged sword. To many around the world, Canada's openness is salvation. To many Canadians, it feels like overload. When Ottawa admitted that more than 2.2 million temporary residents 6.2% of the entire population, were present in 2023, alarms rang. Compare that to the historical norm of around 1%, and the explosion becomes undeniable. Visa mill colleges sprang up overnight, offering low-quality programs that were little more than tickets to residency. Employers exploited temporary foreign workers, paying substandard wages, knowing their permits tied them in place. Critics began to ask, is Canada generous, or is it running a giant Ponzi scheme built on the backs of hopeful students and desperate workers? For policymakers, the distinction between temporary and permanent immigrants became critical. Temporary residents, while vital in the short term, often flooded housing markets, strained healthcare, and suppressed wages. Permanent skilled immigrants, by contrast, were nation builders. Long-term studies by Statistics Canada show that skilled immigrants raise average wages for Canadian-born workers by 3 to 7%. They are more likely to start businesses. They innovate, integrate, and anchor themselves in communities. Yet they, too, began to ask whether the Canadian promise was worth the price. 1 in 4 skilled immigrants leaves within a decade, returning home or moving elsewhere. For them, the dream does not match the reality. What happens when even the nation builders begin to walk away? This paradox, openness that fuels prosperity but also strains the system, is at the heart of Canada's immigration debate. And it cannot be understood without stepping into the shoes of those who see Canada not as a destination of choice, but as a backup plan that somehow became their only option. When you speak to immigrants themselves, the reasons they choose Canada cut through statistics and policies and arrive at something more fundamental: safety. Not the shallow idea of personal safety alone, though that matters, but systemic safety, the confidence that institutions work, that the rules apply, that corruption does not devour every dream. Canadian crime statistics show 2.22 homicides per 100,000 people. That places the country near the top of the Global Peace Index at 11th place. Compare that with Brazil at 22 per 100,000, South Africa at 42, or El Salvador at 52. India's rate of home invasion robbery is 40 times higher than Canada's. Pakistan's kidnapping rate is 15 times higher. These numbers are not just abstract, they are daily realities for families making decisions about their futures. A Brazilian mother does not leave São Paulo because she dislikes the weather. She leaves because her teenage son has been mugged 3 times on his way to school. A South African doctor does not uproot her career because she hates Johannesburg. She does it because carjackings are so routine that driving home feels like playing roulette. For them, Canada's statistics are not boring. They are a lifeline. Yet in Canada, voices whisper, "That is why our crime is rising." We are importing danger, and to those whispers, numbers again provide an answer. Canada's violent crime rates have risen slightly, yes, but they remain among the lowest in the developed world. The bigger story lies not in imported crime, but in imported expectations. According to Transparency International, Canada ranks 14th least corrupt in the world. Police cannot simply be bribed. Courts cannot be bought with a briefcase of cash. The World Justice Project places Canada 9th globally for civil justice and 12th for criminal justice. This means immigrants who once lived in systems where the law was an illusion suddenly find themselves in a country where it works. For them, safety means not fearing that a landlord will seize their home without recourse, or that a hospital will turn them away unless they pay bribes. It means raising children without teaching them how to avoid extortion. Canadians take this for granted, but for many newcomers, it is revolutionary. And yet, even this bright spot casts shadows. Canada's vaunted justice system, they discover, can also feel sluggish, underfunded, and lenient. Catch and release, critics call it, pointing to cases where offenders are quickly back on the street. Immigrants, too, sometimes grow disillusioned when promised safety collides with bureaucratic reality. But in the grand comparison with their homelands, the difference remains stark. Safety, in this systemic sense, explains why Canada is flooded with applications even as housing grows scarce, Healthcare lines grow long, and protests grow loud. In a world where institutions collapse under corruption and violence, Canada's greatest export is not maple syrup or hockey. It is trust. And for those who have never known it, that trust is priceless. Healthcare, the pride and frustration of Canadian life, is the next lens through which the immigration debate comes sharply into focus. Ask any Canadian about their health system, and the response often mixes pride with despair. Pride because no Canadian goes bankrupt paying hospital bills. Despair because waits stretch for months, doctors are scarce, and emergency rooms spill into hallways. It is true. Canada spends 11% of its GDP on healthcare, delivers a life expectancy of 82 years, and shields families from the terror of medical bankruptcy. By contrast, the United States spends nearly 18% of GDP, sees life expectancy stall at 79 years, and forces millions into debt. 2/3 of American personal bankruptcies cite medical costs. Canadians may curse the 6-month wait for an MRI, but immigrants see the system differently. For them, healthcare is not about waiting, it is about surviving. In countries where doctors are underpaid, clinics corrupt, and treatment unaffordable, illness can mean ruin. For a Pakistani mother whose child needs surgery, the cost can swallow 40 to 60% of the household income. For a Nigerian teacher, one hospital visit can erase a year's savings. In Canada, healthcare is flawed but reliable. It offers not only care, but economic security. This difference explains why immigrants value what locals often dismiss. Yet the pressure is real. As temporary residents flood in, students seeking visas, workers filling gaps in labor markets, the system strains. Emergency rooms are not elastic. Nurses cannot be conjured from thin air. In Winnipeg, the Health Sciences Centre became a symbol of this pressure. Nurses told stories of being shoved, punched, even threatened with knives. Doctors spoke of trauma, burnout, despair. Nearly half of physicians reported intimidation in the past year. The province responded with permanent police in the hospital, a grim solution that raised as many questions as it answered. Safety is the foundation of care. Without it, healing collapses. But police cannot cure systemic shortages. The deeper fix lies in training, in investment, in rebuilding trust between patients and providers. Immigration intersects here too, because many of those very nurses and doctors are immigrants themselves. Canada's healthcare system leans heavily on foreign-trained professionals, yet often makes them wait years for accreditation. They arrive ready to serve, but bureaucracy benches them. While Canadians wait in emergency room hallways, skilled professionals drive taxis, their talents wasted. It is a painful irony, one that feeds resentment on both sides. And yet, despite these frustrations, Canada's healthcare remains one of the world's top 15 systems, a shield against the chaos of global inequality. For immigrants, it is proof that institutions can function. For Canadians, it is a reminder that survival does not always feel like success. The debate, as always, lies in perception. Locals see cracks. Newcomers see foundations worth standing on. Together, these competing truths form the fabric of Canadian reality, fragile, frustrating, yet enviable to millions who would risk everything for a chance to join it. Beneath it all, the deeper current shaping Canada's future is political stability, a commodity that has grown rare in a world where democracies are unraveling. Canadians grumble about scandals, a prime minister's vacation expenses, a politician's blackface photos from decades ago. These are headlines here. Elsewhere, they would be prison sentences or worse. Freedom House scores Canada 84 out of 100 for political rights and civil liberties. Not perfect, but in a world where more than 50 countries saw democratic decline in 2024, where press freedom fell in 80% of nations, where rule of law deteriorated in 60%, Canada stands as an outlier. Immigrants know this. For many, democracy is not theoretical, it is survival. In Russia, criticizing the government can end in exile or a cell. In Sudan, in Myanmar, in Afghanistan, opposition is crushed under boot or bullet. Against this backdrop, Canada's messy but functioning democracy is astonishing. Elections happen. Power transfers peacefully. Courts, however imperfect, can be trusted. For those who come from places where dissent is silenced, Canada's loud and argumentative politics feel like oxygen. Education, too, plays a role in this narrative. OECD rankings place Canada consistently in the top 10 globally. Domestic tuition hovers around $7,000 compared to $40,000 at private US universities or $20,000 in the UK. Students graduate with less debt, and the system prioritizes practical skills over rote memorization. For international students, this makes Canada both affordable and aspirational, but it also fuels the tensions that now dominate headlines: classrooms overflowing, housing markets strained, communities unsettled. The flood of students, once seen as opportunity, is now viewed by some as burden. And yet, the reason they come is undeniable. Education here produces problem solvers. It offers a pathway to stability. It promises more than a degree. It promises a future. Ultimately, the story of immigration is not about numbers, but about values. Canada, by accident or design, has become the world's Plan B. Not the first choice for many, but the best remaining option in a world of closing doors. This identity, backup, refuge, second chance, is both blessing and curse. It makes Canada attractive beyond its capacity, pulling hundreds of thousands who might never have looked here if other systems worked. It also places unbearable pressure on housing, healthcare, politics, and culture. The 77% of immigrants who stay are not settling for second best. They are choosing predictability over chaos, collaboration over competition, long-term stability over short-term gain. The 23% who leave are not failures either. They are people whose values or goals diverged from Canada's rhythm. The challenge is to build a system that honors both groups, that distinguishes between nation builders and temporary fillers, that manages numbers without betraying ideals. In the end, life in Canada may feel impossible, but impossibility is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of transformation. For every student waiting for a visa, for every family priced out of housing, for every nurse facing violence, for every citizen marching in the streets, Canada's story is still being written. The choice of what kind of nation it will be rests not only in Ottawa's policies, but in the daily decisions of millions who call this country home or hope to one day. And so, the question that lingers like a shadow at the end of this long narration is not whether Canada will survive, but what kind of Canada will emerge when the storm has passed, and whether it will remain the fragile beacon it has always been to those who have nowhere else to go.